All right, let's go to our next study here. Oral tradition. The oral tradition is a community of people that pass down verbally, orally, the traditions and the stories and all. So this is pretty interesting thing. So very interesting. It's fun. I love this one. But there's a big time misconceptions, plural, about oral tradition. Before writing, they told their stories, and then before the printing press in 1440, about that, Gutenberg, invented the printing press. And then it was 100 years later, 15 something, I can't think of the date right offhand, where the first, all the New Testament was written. And then after that, it became thousands and millions and all. But one of the misconceptions is that they always say, well, it's like telephone. You know how the game, you whisper in the ear, you think of something, pass it along, and then come out to the last person, and totally different story. That is off. I'm sorry, I'm going to scratch it out. It's almost aggravating. That there's such ignorance there. I'm sorry, but there really is. It's not a telephone game. And I'm going to get into why I don't think it is, down here, but just get that misconception out. You can't parallel that. It's like speaking, it's not even apples and oranges. It's not even fruit. Just throw it out. You say, well, how come? Because aren't you speaking and wouldn't it change? Like an event happens, you start telling a story to your kids, and the kids tell it to your kids and the kids and all that. Yeah. Well, I think there's enough study and evidence to say it's not even close to the telephone game. That's a terrible misconception. Now, from my understanding, that, and I might be wrong on some of this, but definitely New Testament, I think the Old Testament possibly too, most were written very soon after the events. Like there's this concept, another misconception, I think, well, this was passed down hundreds of years and they finally wrote it up. Not the New Testament. And we'll get into the early manuscripts and what we have there, but that's a misconception. Everything's oral tradition. No, I think it was very close to the events, it seems. Anyway, let's go on. I'll keep it short. Copies were written soon. Even the copies, I think, were starting to write. If a letter from Paul or whoever, Peter, comes to a church in Galatia or wherever it is, Bithynia, like Peter wrote the different things, and I had this letter, and I have it, and I know I have other brothers and sisters in other churches. I'm going to copy this for them. Or, hey, guess what? Word spread in those days, and what, you got a letter from Peter? I want that. So they wrote copies right away. So it's not like hundreds of years later you get these. They wrote copies or something. Now copy after copy after copy after copy, telephone idea. Kept running around, across the thing, and then what was it really close to the original? We'll get into that later. The big one is hard evidence, although I think they all go together wonderfully. It's good evidence here. But the oral tradition is a fabulous thing to know about, so that we can actually say, wow, this is fantastic. We can trust the oral tradition in those cultures that we actually got the written things. But again, most weren't, or I think most were written very soon after the events, and also copies were written very soon. The third thing I'd like to share is something I learned from a professor, John Weatherly, and I happen to get his class in New Testament. Awesome. But what happened is, I want to tell what he told about this, and it was like fascinating. I actually ended up getting a book from the guy that he mentioned. The late 2016, Kenneth Bailey, I got one of his books, looking at the looking at Jesus through the Middle Eastern eyes. This guy is brilliant, and he decided to go really live in and study the Middle Eastern studies. He's a professor of that. I think it was California or something. I could be wrong. But anyway, he realized that they had incredibly skilled oral tradition practice, and they were really good at it. They were very skilled in their sharing orally. And so what he did is he found, and I might not be accurate on this, I remember this, but I got the gist. I'm not very good at oral tradition, and that's the point. I heard it, I'm going to repeat it, but I'm not very good, but they were, and he proved it. They were experts. These guys were amazing in that culture. And if you think about it, if they didn't have writing and they didn't have, of course, printing presses or tech or, text, we can't text and all that, they have computers. They got very skilled in this. And the proof is what he told about and he wrote about. So basically the story was like this, it just is. He decided let's say he found a tribe here. I don't know if he knew Arabic. As a matter of fact, it's been quoted from an Egyptian. I remember reading that the Egyptian guy said he knows Arabic better than us. He was very good at it. But he knew Arabic, studied that language, and I almost think that he knew other languages, probably knew Greek and Hebrew and others. He was very, 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 very scholarly gentleman. Well, Kenneth Bailey decided, he came in and he visited, that tribe, and he sat with them. And he found this group, this village or tribe, I don't know which, and then he hung out with them and he started just asking them questions and, in their language, and started finding, things. He learned about culture. He's been over there for years. He really learned their culture and all that. It takes a while to learn someone's culture, a group culture. But he found one group particularly that were Christian. Now this is where it gets good. Okay, so he went into this group, and so he sat down with them, and they're all sitting here, and I'll put him here or something. And so they got together, and he asked them as a group, like sort of like you've seen in movies or something. I think there's some truth in this. I don't know if it happened in the evening, but over around a campfire type thing. They started to talk, and he said, well, how do you become a Christian? So this guy shared, and then that guy shared his story, and that guy shared his, and that guy shared his, and they started sharing, how they got it. And he found out that missionaries visited him, and I can't remember how many decades, or maybe 150 years, maybe it was 80, 60, 80, I don't know, maybe 100, maybe 120, maybe 200, 300. And he realized that missionaries had come over and shared the gospel of Jesus Christ with them, and they got converted, and they got saved, and they found peace with God and all. And so it was fascinating to listen to their stories. By the way, it's interesting, in this group sharing, let's say this guy right here, he said something and it was wrong, it was an error. They all jumped on, no, that's not how it was. And oh, that's right. There was a group community sharing of the oral tradition, the history of their stories, where they kept it going. And by the way, I have that. You probably have that in your family. I know how my grandmother received Christ. I know pretty many details in that. I don't know everything, but I heard her say it over and over, and it was always the same. He maybe added something or subtract something. That's another thing. When someone said something, they told the story and they added something, but they kept something out. Another one said that. And by the way, I'm just going to tell you what I think, and what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, when they wrote down their stuff, I said in the last video that they had an emphasis on why they wrote their book, a certain emphasis that they wanted here. Let's say this wanted a triangle and this wanted a square, talk about, Jesus, and this one a circle, different emphasis on Jesus. Well, the other thing is, he left out parts of the story like they may have left out. He left out some, or he added some. They're not contradicting each other. And you say, yes, they are, and you can find seemingly contradictions, but if you go deeper and deeper and you go, oh my goodness, it really works out. That's how I found it so far. And even if it was a contradiction, so what? Remember about the details and all that? So I'm not trying to cover myself. I'm not trying to cover my back on all this. It's just reality of how that culture was, and oral traditions is what we're talking about. Now, what's really cool about this, it gets better and better. Another really fascinating thing is Kenneth Bailey ended up leaving. I think he was that dot. So he left, and he looked for, and he found the missionary, let's say that's a group of missionaries or whatever. He found, what's really cool is he found, I think, their diaries and their reports. They were journaling their work in that area, and he found their journals. He got a hold of them. You know what he did? He compared their journals to this. He compared the oral tradition to the written tradition, or the writings of the actual guys. And they probably wrote it as they went. You're journaling each day. Phenomenal results. It was almost exactly. The details and everything were just extraordinary. They stood out. Like the comparison that like was 100%, and even if it was 99% or what, just okay, a little bit here, a little bit different, their perspective, but the story was the same thing. And it was years and years when they passed it down. I think the more I think about it, like their grandfather, great grandfathers passed it to the grandfather, passed it to the father, and they passed it to their sons. Just like my grandmother, you can pass it to me, and I'll pass it, to people that I know. Of course, I'm not married, so I would pass it to my kid. I would tell my grandmother's thing. And my great grandmother, I found stories out from her, about her. I never met her. Oral tradition. And you probably have stories in your past of your ancestors. So what's really cool is this is a big thing here. His studies about these cultures is that those cultures had such strength and accuracy in their oral tradition because it was an oral culture. Just like I'm pretty strong on trying to get the right letters on a page and writing it right and all that. They got it right, and they did it by group protection to keep the stories correct. And the cool thing is there was a written thing here and I'm accident out, but these two were the same. Oral was what they had written, and the stories were remarkably accurate. Does that help? I thought that was fascinating, really good. So just keep that in mind, that like, how do we know about creation story? Who was there? Adam was created on the sixth day. How did he find out about the other? To me, God spoke with him, and they did walk together. Oh, I'm not loony. He came in the cool of the day, and he fellowshiped with them. And I think he really literally talked to him, just like he literally talks to me, by the way. He does. I'm not loony. And so very cool. And he shared it. And so he passed it down to Cain, and then to Seth, and then to, all the way down through Enoch. And then Moses wrote it down in the first 5 books of the Bible. And that was oral tradition. And they were sharp. Their minds were sharp. They were sharp. And they got it right, too. So Sarah could have corrected Abraham, Sarai or whatever. Nope, that's not right, or whatever. So they worked to get together, and they brought it out, and that's how we got our Bible. At least parts of it. A lot of it was written down really soon afterwards. But you get really good. Like people who are blind, I understand, have the other senses are strengthened somehow, where they have acute hearing. Why? Because their minds are totally dependent on that. They were totally dependent on oral tradition in some of those cultures. And they got really good at telling stories. And I'm not telling a story to you. I'm not lying. God bless you.